Go.
Hi, everyone. Welcome to our virtual author space at Books and Books. Thank you for supporting a locally owned independent bookstore. We're always excited to be here and be in partnership with Miami Book Fair on this wonderful series of events. Tonight, we're super excited to be hosting Elizabeth Wein with her new book, The Enigma Game. She'll be in conversation with Steve Sheinkin. So a little bit about them. Elizabeth Wein was born in New York City, grew up abroad, and currently lives in Scotland with her husband and 2 children. She's an avid flyer of small planes and holds a PhD in folklore from the University of Pennsylvania. Elizabeth is the author of Codename Verity, winner of the Edgar Award in the Young Adult category and a Prince Medal Honor Book, Rose Under Fire, winner of the Schneider Family Book Award, Black Dove White Raven, winner of the Children's Africana Book Award, and a Clip Carnegie Award nominee. Steve Sheinkin is the award-winning author of fast-paced cinematic nonfiction histories for young readers. The Port Chicago 50, Disaster, Mutiny, and the Fight for Civil Rights was a National Book Award finalist and received the 2014 Boston Globe Horn Book Award for nonfiction. The Notorious Benedict Arnold, a true story of adventure, heroism, and treachery, won both the Boston Globe Horn Book Award and the YALSA Award for Excellence in Nonfiction for Young Adults. Bomb, The Race to Build and Steal the World's Most Dangerous Weapon was a Newbery Honor Book, a National Book Award finalist, and a winner of the Seibert Award and YALSA Award for Excellence in Nonfiction for Young Adults. Most Dangerous, Daniel Ellsberg, and The Secret History of the Vietnam War was a National Book Award finalist, a YALSA Excellence in Nonfiction Award winner, and again, a Boston Globe Horn Book Nonfiction Award winner. Sheinkin lives in Saratoga Springs, New York, with his wife and 2 children. So before I hand this over to Elizabeth and Steve, a couple of things about what you're seeing on your screen. At the bottom, in the right-hand corner is the Ask a Question button, and that's what we're going to use for the Q&A portion. So get those questions in there. We'll ask them in just a little bit. And then next to it is our donate button, if you're willing and able to help us keep doors open at Books and Books. And then, of course, the most important button of the night is the one directly below me. It's the big green book. It will take you to where you can purchase the Enigma Game from us, and we are shipping signed book plates with these books. So we appreciate your support in being here, in buying a book, any book, hopefully the Enigma Game from us, and we're happy to be here with you. And I'll hand it over to Elizabeth and Steve.
Hi.
Hey, I'm here.
Hi.
Hello, Elizabeth. Good to see you.
Yeah,
Yeah,
I think the last time we saw each other was actually in Scotland, I believe.
I know. And I mean, that's the one good thing, I guess, that's come of all this, is that we can do this kind of book event together, which I guarantee you I wouldn't have been at your book launch. But this is good. I mean, congratulations on this book. It comes out tomorrow officially.
Yep.
Which is good. It'll be a slow news day.
Yeah. Yeah,
So,
if you need to
there won't be a lot of attention elsewhere. But yeah, this is a fantastic book. And I want to just start by having you talk a little bit about it, but briefly, just kind of the setting, what kind of story it is, and then maybe just read a little bit. Would that make sense?
Yeah. Okay. I have always really, really struggled with the elevator pitch for this book, and I've been kind of working on it. And part of the reason for that is it's got 3 different narrators. So I always want to go into like all the background about them. But it is basically a sort of thriller set mostly on a Royal Air Force Air Base in northern Scotland in 1940. So the Battle of Britain has just finished, and the pilots at this air base are flying out and defending North Sea shipping. And you see some of the story through the eyes of one of the pilots, and some of the story through the eyes of a young woman who is a driver for the Royal Air Force Base, and some of the story through, in fact, a large part of the story, through the eyes of a 15-year-old, half Jamaican, half English girl whose name is Louise, whose parents have both been killed by enemy bombing, and who has decided she needs to get a job. And she ends up over the phone taking a job looking after a German refugee who happens to be the aunt of the old lady who runs the pub by the airfield. So all these people come together and they get in their hands an ENIGMA machine, which is brought to them by a defecting German pilot who was working for the resistance. And shenanigans ensue. And it's really, in many ways, as well as being about sort of the intrigue, and when they get this ENIGMA machine, they're able to decode messages so that the pilots, when they go out, they know where the submarines are, and they're able to bomb them, and they're able to avoid being hit by enemy fire. But really, what's at the heart of the book is the relationships between all these very, very different characters, including the old lady that Louise is taking care of. So the bit that I'm going to read to you is actually from, right in the middle of the action. And it is, there comes a point in the book where the flight squadron intercepts a German plane. There are 3 people on board who are working for the resistance. And this is actually based on something that really happened. Like everything in this book is based on something that really happened, but then of course I took it and put my own spin on it. And they have just landed at this airbase in Scotland, and they've been kind of hauled away to the pub for a brief kind of questioning session before they're all taken off as prisoners of war. And all these like strange civilians and people who happen to be around are there, and the translation is being done by the old German woman because she's the one who can speak German. And she is a retired opera singer. And after this very intense conversation between all these fighting men, she says, right, we're going to play some music. And so there's all these people standing around in this place. There's a lot of tension going on. And there is a moment, which I feel is really kind of at the heart of the novel, where they are all sharing music together. And that's what I'm going to read you. Louisa, Jane called. Jane is the old woman. Wind the gramophone, please. There's something I'd like us all to hear. An Italian version of a German composer recorded in London by a Polish pianist. She held up the record sleeve so everyone could see it. This is Louise's narrative. It was a blocky modern painting of a dove and candle floating among blue musical notes. Wing Commander Cromwell recognized it. Johanna von Arnhem's first record, he exclaimed. Great Scott, that goes back a bit. I heard her sing in the flesh. Beatrice, in Berlioz's Beatrice and Benedict. She must have been over 50 then, but still a sensational performer. Jane blessed him with a saintly smile. You're a fellow opera lover. It's my opinion that von Arnim must have been the greatest mezzo-soprano of last century. I greatly regret I was too young to hear her Carmen. He doesn't know it, but that is actually who he's speaking to. Jane stood for a moment staring down at the record balanced in her hands, glowing. But she didn't say anything else. She just placed the record on the turntable and moved the needle into the outer groove. The record spun, and the room flooded with the waterfall ripple of Bach's Prelude in C, which I know perfectly well because it is the easiest thing he ever wrote for the keyboard, and the only Bach that I can play. And over the top of it, in slow ringing tones, of strength and beauty, came a woman's voice like a bell, singing, Ave Maria, gratia plena. Everyone turned towards the sound. All the young British airmen and soldiers and the German prisoners, too. I have lived with music all my life. I grew up with it, an ordinary thing, a way to earn a living, always there to be shared. Granny Adair plaiting my hair and caroling hymns on a Sunday morning. Hearing Daddy's strong, deep voice coming up the dusty road singing, Good evening, Caroline. Mummy and I both giving a scream of excitement and racing to meet him. Falling asleep in a strange garden under colored paper lanterns in the dark, and listening to Mummy playing the harp at some Navy officer's wedding party. Turning pages for her at school hall concerts in Kingston and in London. Christmas songs at the piano and playing records for 648 Squadron's B Flight on sunny afternoons and stormy nights, ordinary. But this was something else. This music was outside time. It was just a recording, a sound coaxed from shellac through a thorn needle. But while the music played, we were not doing anything but listening. We were not at war. We were not enemies. We weren't anybody special or different from each other. Just people listening. People listening to music together. And I got to say, that's the bit I'm going to read you. But I have to also say that music in the book is used as code. Yeah. So there are a lot of other things that are going on there. But I like, that was actually a theme that I really kind of wanted to get at. And I think that although it's sort of a bizarre passage to read, it gives you a little bit of a taste of what Louise's background is like and how she thinks and all the people that are surrounding her.
Yeah, that makes perfect sense. And in addition, this book includes characters from previous books, especially, I mean, Codename Verity, that universe that beloved book created. But it's I would imagine when you wrote that, I'm going to guess you hadn't thought of this book, or that you would write it, and this book, of course, takes place before that. So I'm wondering, you must have put yourself in some kind of binds, right? When you look to say, I'm going to write this book that takes place in 1940. Now, what have I already decided based on these other books that has to happen?
Yeah, one of the things, there were actually quite a few things that were really dictated by what happened in the other book. And one was the timeline. The first thing that I decided was that I wanted to write a story about a bomber squadron. I really wanted to write a story about an old lady and a young girl. And that was kind of what I started with. And then I thought, okay, they can be like hanging out at an airfield. And I was actually kind of inspired by Lucy Boston, who wrote the Green No books. During the war, she used to give gramophone recitals for the local Air Force squadron, and she would invite these young men who were going out on bombing missions over Germany to come and sit in her house in the evening, and they would just play records all night, and they would just all sit around listening to the records. And I really loved that idea. It was this kind of again, music outside time, where all they were doing was enjoying art and not thinking about the war. And so I had kind of that in my mind, and I thought, right, it's going to be set on an Air Force base. And I have this great idea. One of the pilots in the squadron can be Jamie, the brother for the Codename Verity. It's like, yeah, that's a great idea. And actually, there are things that happen in Codename Verity. There are things that happen to Jamie. There are things that happen to his squadron. And there are certain aircraft that he flies that were suddenly dictated to me. And that was actually very tricky, kind of pulling all that together and making the timeline fit. And there's a mention of this in the notes, actually, at the end of the book, that I had obviously just kind of done a Google search for what kind of bomber aircraft would have been flown in 1940 by the Royal Air Force, and wrote down that one. It's mentioned in Codename Verity, and then I became obsessed with these planes. You can see my little Blenheim I have a little trench art model of a Blenheim here. These are the planes that are flown in the ENIGMA game. But yeah, I didn't have any idea. So the structure of it was kind of dictated, but I really didn't know what the story was going to be. I was, my own kind of trying to think. It's like having a cake mold, like having a bundt pan. And it's up to you what kind of cake you're going to put in it, but the shape of it is always going to be the same.
Yeah.
So, yeah, that's what I did.
That's interesting.
And it was fun. I confess, it was super fun bringing back certain characters for Codename Verity into it and playing with those people again.
Yeah, it was fun to read too. And actually, that's a perfect lead-in, because this is kind of the thing I'm most curious about. And maybe it's a writer kind of question, but you had this ability, which people have seen in Verity and other books, to take these really, I mean, just the most serious of situations, and even have plots with tragic twists. I'm not giving anything too much away to say that it's World War II, and yet they're fun. They're adventures. There's an excitement about them that comes, almost a lightness, certainly not in the theme, but in the words, in the way they jump off the page. And I think there's something very sophisticated about that. I don't know if you can explain how you do it, if it's a trade secret, if it's something you think about.
I don't know. It's maybe just my personality coming out in the way I tell a story. So halfway through what you were saying, I was thinking, well, that's really just down to Louisa and Jane's characters. But of course, I made them up.
Yeah.
So they are very positive characters, and I do tend to create very positive thinking characters. I tend to create hopeful people. And even when they're bitter and twisted, they're kind of like fighting for something that they believe in. And Louise's character developed a lot as I was working on this book. It actually went through two major rewrites and 3 major drafts. And originally, she was the only narrator, which was very limiting because it meant that you didn't get in the air a lot. Right. But it also meant that when some of the narrative was taken away from her, I really, really had to focus to get some of her, sort of meandering memories, whatever, pared down and to keep the essence of her in there. I honestly, I don't know, maybe it's a writer superpower. I don't know how. I decided a while ago that I never really wanted to write any book that didn't have a happy ending. And some people might argue with me on that. But the thing is, I think that even when there is real tragedy in what I write, or when I try to put real tragedy, I want to pat myself on the back and say that I succeed. But even when there are terrible things that happen, I try to have people grow and move on. Because that's kind of what I want. I guess if I have a message, that's what I want my message to be. You can get through this.
Yeah, I think you're right, and I think there's something to the way people talk about. You can taste the love in cooking, or you can hear that someone's smiling when they talk, even if you can't see them. And I think you have the ability to put that into the narrative, which is really special. But I've also heard, I mean, you brought this up, I've heard you talk about readers who've come up to you angry at you.
Yeah. Because
of things that happened to certain characters that they loved. And it's funny, I mean, I'm mostly a nonfiction person. Terrible things happen in the kinds of stories I like to write too, but I don't have to make them up. I don't have to play God or decide who lives and who dies. And so knowing how passionate readers' reactions are going to be, I mean, does it ever impact your thinking? Do you ever think, well, maybe I need to take it easy on this person?
I don't actually. I'm very hard on my characters in general, including the ones that I really, really love. I'm known for, as you know, if you've read Codename Verity, for one particular, really terrible literary crime, which is kind of why people get mad at me. It's for that one specific thing. And I don't think that I gratuitously try to torture my readers. Like, it made a lot of plot sense in Codename Verity, you know, and there is as you will be aware, some stuff goes down in the Enigma game as well. And some of that is dictated by the events of Codename Verity. So like, if you know that book well, you can kind of guess how the story is going to end for some of the people in this book.
Sure.
And yes, I made that up too, but when I made it up, I did not anticipate getting to know characters who were only mentioned really peripherally in Codename Verity. I didn't realize that I was going to come to know them, you know, quite intimately. So
Yeah.
I don't try to hurt people.
All right, this is a less controversial topic of well, research, but maybe it's not, because I mean, I think about this a lot. I'm an obsessive researcher. I know you are too, and that's hands-on as well as everything you can do in books and online. And but I did a panel recently, virtually, of course, like everything now, but where authors, serious authors I admire, and they said, you know, there comes a point where I just have to put the research away and I have to write without the notes in front of me, which I found personally shocking, because I never do that. I mean, I literally have notes open on my screen when I'm writing.
And, sorry, was this a person who writes fiction or nonfiction?
Some of both.
Okay. Because it's easier to do when you're writing fiction. But yeah, I think sometimes I do have to do that. Actually, sometimes I have to, as a fiction writer, I have to just go away from the book and like go away from my desk, go drive somewhere, or go grocery shopping, or go for a walk, or whatever, and think about it as I'm doing it, because I find that stuff just really doesn't come until it's kind of, you know, percolated properly. And then I can go back and fill in the stuff. The book that I've been working on now, I have been doing a lot of research, and also with Codename Verity I did this. I did a lot of the research while I was writing the book. So it's really, I really depend a lot on the relationships between my characters to drive the plot. And the research is just kind of background. It's like weather, you know? And I mean, it is actually like weather, because you look it up and then you think, oh, well, this is going to affect what actually happens to them. You know, what was going on in December of 1940 is going to affect how they react in context.
Yeah. So do you ever have a problem with finding too much? Especially what I do is I convince myself that I need one more source or one more piece of information, when you really don't. I mean, does that come in fiction writing as well?
Yeah, and a lot of times I'll be you know, like trying to come up with like the perfect, trying to come up with the interior of the hotel. So Rose Under Fire has a scene, well, a lot of Rose Under Fire is written by the narrator in the Ritz Paris, and, you know, trying to find out like what kind of blankets were on the beds, you know, what the curtains look like you don't actually need to know that. But I spend a lot of time trying to figure out what that is. And that happens a lot, just like going too far. I actually also have the same trouble when I'm writing a scene. I want to tell everything that happened, right down to, you know, sort of like they picked up their forks and knives and there was a noise as they did that, and somebody else came in the room, and like, you don't actually need all this information. You don't need it in nonfiction.
Right.
And you don't need it in fiction either. And I think having written a little nonfiction, I would say it's almost easier to make those jumps writing nonfiction than it is. I mean, there are probably more interesting things that you want to include, but the little nitty-gritty details that I get hung up on, like I can't just have somebody drive off. They have to open the door and walk out to the car and notice the flowers on the way and unlock the car door, you know, and it's not necessary. And you have to get rid of it.
Did you end up writing some of that anyway? Ended up writing too much?
Yes.
And then bring back?
Yes. Yes.
That could be very, I mean, that could be, I mean, for the book that I'm working on, I've never written so much that I didn't use. But in a way, something I'm working on now, yeah, that I'm just revising now. And in a way, it's frustrating, but in another way, it helps. It really does. It's painful when you're doing it, when you're cutting stuff that when you were writing this could be my opening scene. This is so good, and then it ends up just being completely gone. And yet somehow makes what's left stronger.
Yeah, well, what I cut from the Enigma game from my first draft was like, I don't know, 40 pages of backstory of not Louise's life, but how her mother died and what this is not really a spoiler because she starts out with her mother dying. And she dies off the page, but she used to die on the page and like in a hospital over a week. And Louisa was like going back and forth to visit her and wasn't there with her when she actually got, and like there was all this stuff and she was talking to people on the underground as she traveled there and there were bombs falling and there was this whole like scene during the Blitz in London and it's all gone. It's just, but it's there because it means that Louisa has a very complicated past that I can refer to very naturally because it's all there in my memory, just as it's, you know, all there in her memory.
Yeah, I agree. I think you have to figure all that out and even write it. Probably. It'd be nice not to. And I mean, you mentioned it. You've done other kinds of stories than historical fiction. You've done some nonfiction, which is great, and some fantasy as well. And I don't know, is there a theme? Is there, I know there's always a lot of aviation and adventure, but is there something deeper or more, something that unifies all the stories?
Yeah, so my, people say, oh, what a leap you made from writing Arthurian fantasy set in 6th century Ethiopia to writing a World War II spy novel. And I was like, it was no leap, they're both spy novels. I mean, they really are it's kind of like the same type of characters doing the same type of daring do. It's just set in a different time. But my theme, really what I do sort of try to hammer into my books, and really the only proper takeaway, I said that my takeaway would be, you know, you can get through this. That's not really a lesson. That's something I hope you come away with. If there is a lesson to be learned in my writing, it is take responsibility for your own actions. And my kids have heard this hammered into them all their lives. You know, if you are guilty, admit your guilt and try to do something about it. You know, it's in your hands to atone for stuff. It's in your hands to change things. But you have to be aware that things that you do are your things. You have to own them. So I think that if you go looking for a theme, you'll really find that in everything that I write.
Yeah, I see that. And do you think it's also rooted in the things that really affected you as a child and as a teen, in terms of what you read, either the specific books or a feeling that you got from them that lingered, that you're trying to recapture? Was that based initially, you think, on your reading?
Yeah, I mean, my reading is very much part of me. When I wrote Codename Verity, part of the reason that I decided to make the Verity character an aristocrat was because I wanted her to have a bit of a literary background, and so I sent her to school, you know, and I wanted her to kind of have read the same stuff that I'd read, or some of the same stuff or similar stuff, because it made it easier for me to write. Not because I was trying to make a statement about reading, but just because it made it a lot easier for me to write. And so Louisa is also a reader, and she's read a lot of the same things that I've read. And that's also because it makes me easier. It makes it easier for me to write her. It makes me easier. It's easier for me to get in her head. But the other thing that kind of Louisa and I, and just about every character I've ever made up, have in common is that they all tend to be, I used to say they're all exiles. And then I discovered the term third culture kids, or TCKs for short. And I realized that that's what all my characters are. They, like me, have parents from different countries to the country that they're living in, and they grow up in cultures that are not necessarily their own culture, or at least in the book they're displaced from where their sort of, you know, natural home is. And dealing with that, they're always a little bit of an outsider because they are different culturally from everybody else in the book. And I think this is something that certainly for many years I have brought unconsciously to my writing. After a while, I started to notice that it was going on. And now it is definitely much more a conscious thing.
That's interesting that it started out without you realizing it consciously. All right, I've got lots more questions. I know there are some audience questions too, but I can't see you guys out there. So is there a way I can see those questions, or we can start sharing some of those?
There's 7 of these.
Okay, oh good, here we go.
If you click on that thing, you can see them.
Oh yeah?
Do you want me
something to hang up on you or something?
I can read them off, or you can. Basically, you just click on this ask a question button. But
yeah, you go ahead. That'd be good.
Okay.
So I see here a comment. So I'm just gonna also. Ooh, whoa, my screen really zoomed in. Sorry. I want to read that comment real quick. This is from Terry. They said, Elizabeth, Coding and Verity changed my reading life. I love sharing it with others at the store I work at. I always tell customers I'm not responsible for any tears that are shed. So that's the comment that I wanted to share with you.
It's all me, right?
This person said, you mentioned a Google search. Can you talk about your research process and how long or extensive it was for this book?
I do have a pattern, and it is I go out and I accumulate a whole bunch of books on the subject or subjects that I want to write about, and I read them, and I think about my characters, and I read, and I don't actually start writing. And then after a while, when I've read, I don't know, 5 books or whatever, sometimes I get lucky and I find one that's really, really relevant. And I then start writing, and the research continues in parallel with the writing. For this book, I'm trying to think I've mentioned some of the things that I read in the background. It was very, very eclectic because I was reading about Caribbean servicemen in the UK during World War II, and I had a lot of books on that. And like some of the stuff that I was reading wasn't even, I was reading poetry by a woman who was running a radio program for BBC aimed at people from the Caribbean. And so I was going down all these rabbit holes, and fiction by Neville Shute and just all kinds of things. But I was also reading about internment camps, the British interned German aliens during both World Wars who were in the UK. And the old woman character, Jane, starts out the book in one of these camps. So I was reading about them, and most of that doesn't even get talked about. There's like that much in the book that, sort of it's background. And then I was reading about the Blenheim bombers and the different squadrons that flew them. And I was reading about these crazy Germans who stole planes and came and landed in the UK trying to broker peace treaties, stuff that I didn't know existed. And there was a lot of stuff that went into the background. But when I start writing and the book itself is beginning to take shape, then what happens is I will be, on a roll, and I'll suddenly come to, what newspaper were they reading in Northern Scotland in December 1940? And so that's when I'll start doing the Googling, you know, and trying to find out that stuff, or how much, oh my gosh, there's a whole thread of gas heating and this coin-operated gas meter, and finding out how that heckin' coin-operated gas meter worked, and what kind of gas it used, and what it smelled like, and I keep doing this, putting coins in it, and how much it costs to get how much heat for how long, you know, all this stuff was really, really hard work, because there's not a book about that. And you end up going down rabbit holes with, you know, turns out that the post office, I mean, British people will know this, but I didn't know this. The post office ran the telephone companies in the UK for years. The Royal Mail and the telephone company were one. Who knew? So I tend to work as I'm writing, and the internet is my friend. And I don't know how I did it before. I mean, I did research stuff and write stories before Google, before Wikipedia. And I honestly don't know how I do it. If you want to read a story of mine that was written by doing research in the Bodleian Library and going to the Birmingham Art Gallery and the British Museum, I have a short story called For the Briar Rose, I think. For the Briar Rose, and it is in, I'm sorry, I'm useless. It's in a collection. It's all about Burne Jones, the pre-Raphaelite artist, painting the Sleeping Beauty series of paintings, and it's about his daughter having her first baby, and it's like there's all this amazing stuff, and I reread this thing and I go, how did I do this? I just don't know how I ever managed it, because now I'm addicted to Google.
Okay, so I have another question.
That was a long answer for probably a straightforward question. Steve, if you are just sitting there going, oh,
yeah, I'm looking at it right now. Actually, there's
what about you, Steve?
For
How
both
long
did you see that one?
Yeah.
I would love to see the two of you collaborate on a topic. We've done a lot of, there's been overlap. And will you ever move into Cold War history?
That's where I was going next, yeah.
Yeah, I mean, that's the book I'm working on now. I have one of my nonfiction books is called Bomb, and I too am very influenced by spy thrillers. And that was my attempt to write a nonfiction version of a spy thriller. It's about the Manhattan Project and the scientists making a bomb while Soviet spies are trying to steal it. And so I took that story for my next book into the Cold War, up to the making of the hydrogen bomb and up to the real climax of the Cold War, the Cuban Missile Crisis. And so it's very much, again, talking about themes, is very much in the theme of what I'm trying to do. But I don't know, I like the collaboration idea too. But in terms of your work, do you see, you've done a few World War II stories, which makes sense because you have this universe that you've created. Are there other parts of history that you're eager to jump into, either forward or back in time?
I actually I do tend to kind of go back and forth a little bit. Black Dove, White Raven was set in the 1930s, and the novel that I'm working on now is also set in the 1930s. I still like playing in the World War II sandbox. I don't know, I just keep finding out more stuff. It's kind of eternally fascinating. But yeah, I get obsessed with things. If I read something and I suddenly think, wow, this is super interesting, I will want to write about it. And at the moment, it's, this kind of snowball effect where I'm doing so much research on World War II that's what I end up writing about. But there isn't another time period that is, sort of like clutching at me saying, please write about me, but I don't rule out anything.
Okay. Do you want to read another one?
Yeah. So Sarah wrote, hello from Scotland. Music plays a role in this story. Do you listen to music when you write? If not, did you change your writing process to immerse yourself fully into the characters and plot? And congratulations on your Carnegie nomination.
Oh, thank you. Thank you. I do listen to music while I write. If there's music in the book, that's what I was listening to. So, and obsessively. So in the Enigma game, the theme that kind of keeps coming back and forth. And actually the UK, my UK publisher, Bloomsbury, made a little book trailer that uses that theme in their trailer, which I was very thrilled by. But it's Mendelssohn's Hebrides Overture. And careful readers will see that it's also mentioned in Codename Verity. But Mendelssohn's Hebrides Overture, I listened to it a lot while I was writing Codename Verity, and I also listened to it a lot while I was writing the Enigma game, although it's much more overtly used in this. I think part of the reason it gets to me so much is because it was written by Mendelssohn after he visited Scotland, after he visited the Western Isles and took a boat trip out to Staffa, I believe. But also because he was Jewish, his music was banned in Nazi Germany. And I just, this idea that this German classical musician was writing music about Scotland, and it all kind of, I just like the way it all sort of comes together. So I listened to that, and I listened to popular songs from the 1940s. So you can look up the Spitfire song that gets mentioned. I ended up singing it so much that my kids know it now. Kind of annoying. But yeah, I do. As I say, usually the music that's related to the book, but not always. So when I was writing Firebird, which is not published in the US, unfortunately, it's a short novel. I don't actually have a copy of it here, but I have a copy of the second one I wrote for the same company, which is White Eagles, and you can see they're very slender books, and they're aimed at dyslexic readers. And Firebird has kind of a riff on the Romanovs going on, and I listened to the music from the musical Anastasia while I was writing it over and over again. And the Leningrad Symphony. So funny combination of stuff going on there.
What about you, Steve? Do you listen to music while you're writing?
Usually, I'm really kind of a hermit in this little room that I have, and I just kind of put stuff up on the walls that are really essentially my outlines, but just pictures, and the cards I use are my very 20th century way of outlining stories. You could do it on a computer too, but I have to put down each idea for a scene with a different color. And
Are those?
I'm distracted, but sorry, go ahead.
No, I see. I think we see some behind you on your.
Yeah. I've seen his cards before, and I'm so jealous of your organization.
It's not that I'm very organized.
It looks organized to me.
Maybe the opposite, and then I have to force myself to be, so I can't listen to anything. I just kind of have to lock myself in here.
And Elizabeth, Sharon asked, when was the last time that you went up in a plane? As a pilot, she said.
Well, I am out of check, so I am not the #1 pilot, but I go flying with my husband a lot, and I usually do most of the flying, except he takes off, and then I fly. And the last time we went flying was, I think it was about 2 weeks ago, and we flew to Oban, which is on the west coast of Scotland. And it was the best day out ever. We flew to Oban, we landed, I'd taken a picnic because we're all under lockdown, and they had just they had just instituted new rules, which were that we weren't allowed inside anyone's house. And there was this complicated thing, which is still in force, where like the restaurants had to shut at 6, then they were allowed to serve food during the day, but they weren't allowed to serve alcohol. And it was really, really complicated. We didn't think we were going to get any lunch. So I brought this picnic with me, and we walked down this abandoned road to the beach, found a pub that was open, seating all outside, looking out over this bay and this bridge. And we had our lunch there, and then we picked blackberries on the way back and took them home and made blackberry jam. So it was like this just idyllic day out. I didn't tell you about the but I mean, I flew for about 2 hours, but that's kind of one of the real joys of, we do not own a plane, in case you're wondering. We hire aircraft from the local flying school. And it's an interesting time to be a pilot. It's an interesting time to be involved in the aviation industry at all. And one of the guys who taught me to fly is now a commercial pilot, but he's actually back working at this flying school because they're in business. People are hiring planes and taking instruction, and the commercial planes aren't flying. So we get it in while we're able to. They may shut us down any day.
Yeah. Here's a question for both of you. How has the pandemic and like the newsreel this year affected you creatively? Because I know some people it hasn't really affected, but some people it's been good or bad to be home all the time.
My work situation is not terribly different, except that I have more people around, and I'm sharing an office, which I'm finding somewhat trying at times.
Cozy.
My husband also finds it trying at times. But as far as, I wouldn't have said that, like, I sat there like, oh, I have all this extra time. This is great. I don't have to go anywhere. I'm going to get so much done, because I didn't. It's a lie. I too made a sourdough culture. Yeah. And a lot of and sorted out my books and like lots of other things. Yeah. But I also wrote a book. So yeah, it hasn't really affected me that much.
That's good.
Creatively.
Yeah, I've had a lot more time at home, which is kind of, in a way, a good thing. I mean, obviously the travel is not happening. I think I was at a good place, only in this one sense, in terms of what I was writing, that all the hard stuff had been figured out. Because I know there's been it hasn't been anybody's best year of thinking, but so much of what I had to do had been figured out, and it was really just hard work at that point to kind of get all these stories down on paper and get them in order. Yeah. And that was actually, I think, a lot easier than it would have been to do what for me is the harder part, the beginning part of the process of just, how do I wrangle this story? How do I fit it all together? And luckily I had done that, and it was just kind of drafting and revising this year, as opposed to some of the more early.
Mm-hmm. One of the things that's really kind of driven me, I mean, I've had a lot of research. I've got some other projects going on that I was supposed to be researching this summer at collections in the States, and I have not been able to get to them. So that, I mean, we've actually put projects, pushed them down the line a year because it just the work just can't get done. And for the novel that I'm working on now, there's this one book that I can't get hold of that I was about to go and read on interlibrary loan at the National Library in Edinburgh, and the library's closed, and it's been closed for 6 months. So yeah, and creatively, it hasn't really hurt me, but there's stuff that you just have to live with.
So I'm going to ask you guys my last question, and then we'll wrap it up as we come up on an hour. Have you guys read anything lately or in the last, in 2020 that you would recommend to our viewers tonight?
So I end up blurbing a lot of books, and I would recommend Steve's book.
Hey,
I do recommend Steve's book, which I've just read, and you'll see a theme going on here.
Yeah.
But this is about the women's air race in the United States in 1929, and has some people in it that you'll recognize. And also Shirley L. Smith's book, The Blossom and the Firefly.
Mm-hmm.
There's a theme to the books that I recommend as well.
Yeah.
That was a book that I read because I was asked to blurb it, and I'm so glad that I did, because it's fantastic. It's about a kamikaze pilot, and basically the girl who does his laundry, which was a thing. It's a really lovely book.
Awesome. Anything, Steve?
I can go on, but
I'm surrounded by books. I still love to buy old-fashioned copies of books. I mean, I've been reading nonstop Cold War, Space Race, Berlin Wall, Spies, of course. I love spy stories, and I've been really stuck in, and I'm not stuck in, but reading mostly nonfiction stuff, and nothing new by any means. One of the really fun things I've done in this pandemic time, again, just because I have to do something, is I've started reading lots and lots of mostly middle grade novels, and kind of created a little game show where I invite novelists on with fans of the book. I really want Elizabeth to do this too. And they have a contest to see who knows more about the author's book. And that's been really, it's called Author Fan Face Off. And that's been really fun because I've gone through, I'm so busy usually reading research books that I haven't read enough by the great books that people are writing right now, especially in the middle grade and young adult world. So I'm really, that's one silver lining too. I'm sort of catching up with that.
That's cool. That's cool. And that's actually, I don't, I go in stages of blurbing things because I really enjoy it, because it gives me this chance to read stuff that I would never read otherwise. And by the same token, a lot of times I just haven't got time to do it. So having something like that where you are,
it's good.
This is my job. I have to read this book because it's work, even if you're not getting paid.
No money involved.
Yeah.
But yeah, it's been good.
Awesome. Well, thank you guys so much for spending your time with us. Congratulations to you, Elizabeth, on the ENIGMA Game coming out tomorrow. Thank you to everyone who was watching. Thank you for your questions. Anyone who watches this back later, this green button will still work. And we have plates as long as they last to send with every order. We ship nationally, internationally. Just reach out to us. We'd be thrilled to get you books. So thank you, Steve, for conversation. Sorry, go ahead.
I wanted to say thank you to Steve as well for agreeing to be here and to join me and to kind of lead the conversation. But I also wanted to say thank you to you and to Books and Books, because you called me in before, and I'm really sorry that I can't be there in person.
Yeah, we were so excited to see you, and we had this different thing going on a couple months back, but we're excited we got to do it anyways, and we're thrilled to have the book on shelves. So, all right. Well, thank you both. Thanks again to our audience.
Congratulations again.
Thank you, Steve.